I've always considered myself a pretty average guy, living a quiet life in this old suburban house. It's the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. The most exciting part of my day is usually deciding what to have for dinner. But last Tuesday that all changed. It was a gray, drizzly afternoon when I found it. A plain, brown cardboard box sitting right on my doorstep. No address label, no return sender, no postage stamps, nothing, just a box. My first thought was that it was a delivery mistake, maybe a neighbor's package. But I checked around and no one was expecting anything. Curiosity got the better of me. It felt surprisingly light, and when I shook it, something rattled inside. So I took it in, set it on the kitchen counter, and carefully sliced through the packing tape. Inside, nestled in a mess of styrofoam peanuts, was a single black VHS tape. Now, I haven't owned a VCR in probably 15 years. Who even uses these things anymore? The tape had no label, just a small, handwritten number 1 on the spine. It was bizarre, to say the least. A part of me wanted to just toss it in the trash, write it off as some weird prank. But I couldn't, the mystery was too compelling. I spent the next hour digging through my attic, coughing through dust and cobwebs, until I finally unearthed my old clunky VCR from college. I lugged it downstairs, my heart pounding in a strange mix of excitement and unease. I hooked it up to the small TV in my study, the one I rarely use. The static hum of the old machine filled the quiet room. I slid the tape in the plastic mechanism, whirring and clunking loudly. I pressed play and waited. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, black and white image. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was my house, filmed from across the street. The camera was shaky, as if held by hand. It slowly zoomed in on my front door, the same door I had just walked through with the box. Then it panned up to the living room window, where a faint light glowed from within. My light? I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The footage was clearly recent. The leaves on the trees were the same shade of autumn orange as they were right now. The recording continued for about 10 minutes, just a steady, unnerving shot of my house. No sound, just the silent, watchful gaze of the camera. Then the screen went to static. I sat there, staring at the snowy screen, my mind racing. Who would do this? Why? Was it some elaborate prank by a friend? But none of my friends would go to this much trouble, and the feeling it gave me, it wasn't funny. It felt predatory. I ejected the tape, my hands trembling slightly. My quiet little house suddenly didn't feel so safe anymore. I walked through every room, double-checking the locks on the doors and windows. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I barely slept that night. I kept picturing someone standing across the street, watching, filming. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a weird, one-off event. I went about my day, trying to push the unease to the back of my mind. But when I got home from work, my blood ran cold. There it was again. Another brown box, identical to the first, sitting on my porch. My hands shook as I picked it up. This time I knew what would be inside. I didn't even hesitate. I brought it straight to the study. Inside, just as I expected, was another VHS tape. This one had a small number 2 scrawled on the spine. With a sense of dread, I put it into the VCR. The static cleared, and the image that appeared made my stomach drop. It was the inside of my house. The footage started in the hallway, slowly panning across the family photos on the wall. The camera moved with a creeping slowness, exploring my home as if it were its own. It went into the kitchen, lingering on the dirty coffee mug I'd left on the counter that morning. It panned across my bookshelf, the spines of my favorite novels in clear view. It was a violation of the deepest kind. Someone had been inside my house, but when I'm always so careful about locking up, how could they have gotten in? The footage was even grainier than the first, and the lighting was dim, suggesting it was filmed at night or in the early morning. There was no sound, just the silent, methodical tour of my private space. Then the camera moved up the stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each step it took on screen, I felt a new wave of terror. It reached the top of the landing and paused, pointing down the hall towards my bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. The camera pushed the door open and entered my bedroom, my sanctuary. It swept across the room, showing my unmade bed, the clothes draped over a chair, the book on my nightstand. It felt like I was watching a ghost explore my life. I couldn't take it anymore. I hit stop and ejected the tape, throwing it across the room. I felt suffocated. I wasn't just being watched from the outside anymore. The watcher had been inside. They had walked where I walk, touched what I touch. I called the police. I tried to explain the situation, the boxes, the tapes. They sent an officer over, a tired-looking man who listened patiently, but with a clear air of skepticism. He took a report, looked around, found no signs of forced entry, and told me it was probably just some kids playing a prank. He advised me to maybe install a security camera. A security camera, the irony was suffocating. After he left, the house felt even more menacing. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken threats. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist into a human form. I couldn't stay there. I packed a small bag and went to a cheap motel on the other side of town. I needed to feel anonymous, to be somewhere that wasn't my home, but sleep offered no escape. I was plagued by nightmares of a faceless figure holding a camera, their lens fixed on me. I stayed away for 2 days. 2 days of trying to rationalize, to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was a squatter who had been living in the attic. Maybe I had a carbon monoxide leak and was hallucinating. I considered every possibility, no matter how remote. Finally, I convinced myself I was overreacting. I had to go back. I couldn't let some stupid prankster drive me out of my own home. I returned on Friday afternoon, armed with a new resolve and a baseball bat I kept in my trunk. The house was just as I'd left it, quiet, still, but on the porch my resolve crumbled. There was a third box, box number 3. This time, a different kind of feeling washed over me. Not just fear, but a grim, fatalistic acceptance. I had to see it. I had to know what came next. I walked inside, locked the door behind me, and went directly to the study. My hands were steady now. I unwrapped the box, took out the tape labeled with a number 3, and slid it into the VCR. I pressed play. The screen flickered. It was my bedroom again. The view was from the corner of the room, near the ceiling, looking down at my bed, and in the bed was me, sleeping. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 3:14 a.m. Last night. No, the night before last. The night I was supposedly safe in a motel across town. But the video was undeniable. It was my face, my bed, my room. The rhythmic rise and fall of my chest as I breathed. I stared, mesmerized and horrified. I watched myself sleep for what felt like an eternity. The silent, grainy footage was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. And then something in the frame moved. From the dark shadow in the corner of the room, the same corner where the camera seemed to be positioned, a figure began to emerge. It was tall and slender, completely draped in darkness, its features obscured. It moved with an unnatural slowness, gliding towards the bed, towards me. It stood over me for a long moment, just watching. I could feel its gaze through the screen, a cold, clinical observation. Then, slowly, it raised a hand and reached down, its fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my forehead on the screen. My sleeping self didn't stir. The figure held its hand there for a moment before retracting it and melting back into the shadows. The tape continued, just showing me sleeping, for another 30 minutes before cutting to static. I ejected the tape. My breath was gone. My mind was a vortex of pure terror, the motel. I was never safe. The figure, it was in the room with me. It was in the room with me as I slept, filming. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that slowly dawned on me, a cold, sickening certainty that crawled up from the pit of my stomach. I looked at the tape in my hand, then at the other 2 lying on the floor. I looked at the VCR, this ancient machine I dragged from my attic, and I finally understood. There was no sign of forced entry because they didn't need to break in. There was no one mailing the packages because they didn't need a mailman. The person making these tapes was me. I was the one setting up the camera. I was the one filming, and the figure, the tall, slender figure that watched me sleep, that was also me, another version of me. A version I don't know, a version that comes out when I sleep. And as I sat there, in the silence of my study, a new box appeared on my doorstep. I didn't have to look to know it was there. And I didn't have to open it to know what was on tape number 4. It would be a recording of me right now, watching tape number 3, a look of dawning horror on my face. The show was for an audience of 1, and the performance was just beginning. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content like this. Stay safe out there.